Welcome back everyone to the 6th round of the US Championship. In today's game we have Hikaru Nakamura versus Timur Gareyev. Hikaru is one of the leaders heading into the 6th round, and he has white against the lower rated Gareyev. So Hikaru will definitely try to win this game. With that being said, Gareyev is not to be underestimated. He has shown that he belongs in this tournament by beating a Wanda Liang in the previous round. So without further ado, let's jump into the game. Hikaru with the white pieces opens the game with knight f3, the ready opening. c5 from Gareyev, Hikaru goes g3, g6, and on move 3 Hikaru decides to mix things up with c3. Interestingly, this has been played between Ivanchuk and Anand in 2011. Ivanchuk actually won that game with the white pieces. In this game, Gareyev continued with d5, bishop g2 from Nakamura, knight to f6, d4, knight b to d7, protecting c5. And previously, white tried castles kingside with good results. But here Nakamura played knight to e5, and on earliest move 6 we have reached a new position. Black can try and continue his development with bishop g7, but I suspect that Gareyev didn't like the move knight takes d7, and after bishop takes d7, pawn takes c5, where white is up a pawn, but black I think is doing fine in this position because of his slight lead in development, and white also gave up some central control. And if instead of bishop takes d7, let's say knight takes d7, d takes c5, so the pawn on d5 is attacked twice, and on e6 white can go bishop e3 to protect c5, but I still think this position is fine for black due to the same reason that white has given up some central control. But Gareyev didn't want to risk losing a pawn against Nakamura. He played queen to b6, protecting c5 and bringing the queen out early in the game. And after d takes c5, queen takes c5, knight d3, queen to c7, you can see that black has already moved the queen 3 times in this game. So Hikaru now played queen to a4, which pins the knight, and after bishop g7, bishop to f4, so now e5 can't be played because if knight takes e5, this knight on d7 is pinned. So bishop f4 again inconveniences the queen, it drops back to d8, both sides castle, knight to d2, knight to b6, queen b3, bishop g4, and now rook f to e1 defending e2. So what's the evaluation in this position? Well, Nakamura has a few things going for him. For one, these bishops exert nice pressure on the queen side. White also has this pawn on c3 to help blunt some of that pressure exerted by the bishop on g7. In addition to that, b7 seems a bit weak and can be suspect to ideas like a4 and a5. White also controls the e5 square twice with the knight and bishop, making it difficult for black to achieve this e5 move and establish a strong center. So the good thing for black in this position is that he has these 2 central pawns as opposed to white only having 1 pawn in the center. But it's difficult to play e5. As we have just mentioned, white controls e5 twice. So in short, white is better in this position. Gareyev first tries to deal with some of that pressure on the queen side with the move queen c8, just giving some protection to b7 and also supporting knight c4 in some lines. Nakamura now played queen to b4. So you might be thinking, what's the purpose of this move? Hikaru probably didn't like what happens after the obvious a4, intending a5, as black can go knight c4, and if the knight is taken, this attacks queen and knight and forces white to go queen takes b7. And after some exchanges, this ending is unclear, but it's easier to play with black because of the ability for black to go a5 and lock down white's queenside majority. White's rooks, especially the one on a1, will have difficulty finding open lines. And if, instead of taking, let's say bishop takes d5, this is another try to remove the defender of the c4 knight, and after knight takes d2, bishop takes, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, well, white has an extra pawn, but at the cost of the two bishops. So Hikaru didn't like this. He played queen to b4. So now knight c4 is met with simply taking, and this doesn't come with tempo on the queen on b3. And here white can play bishop takes b7. So after queen b4, rook to e8 played. We have a4, knight b to d7. Black is getting ready to push e5, and Nakamura stops that with knight to e5. Now a5, attacking the queen and preventing white from gaining more space with a5. Nakamura goes queen b5. We have knight takes e5. Nakamura tries his best to maintain the grip on e5. Bishop d7, queen d3, bishop c6, queen to d4. So now the big problem with black's position is dealing with the blockading bishop on e5. And black really wants to go e5 and establish central control. So how does he go about doing this? So one option is to go knight to h5, directly challenging the e5 bishop. And after bishop takes g7, knight takes g7, f4 does make it difficult to push e5, but I think black is fine with knight f5, forcing the queen back, and now queen c7, prepping e5. If white tries knight f3, black takes control of the space left behind by the white knight, which is the e4 square, with knight d6, and the game continues. The other alternative, which was what Gareyev played, is queen to f5, although this poses less difficulties for Hikaru. The intention here is to go bishop h6, attempting to overload this queen. As you can see, it's defending the bishop and knight. And bishop h6 also frees up the knight to come to d7 and challenge the bishop. Hikaru played knight f1, anticipating bishop h6, and now knight e3 might be a possibility. Black should probably continue the plan of bishop h6, where white would have to play bishop takes h6 to prevent knight d7 or even knight g4. So black accepts a damaged structure, but he has the two bishops and play goes on. But instead we see the move rook a to d8 from Gareyev. So obviously worried about the pressure on d5, especially with the knight coming to e3. But Gareyev underestimated Hikaru's next move. Sorry about that. Hikaru played b4. And the threat is simply to go b5. And then knight e3, followed by capturing on d5. And it also helps that knight on f6 is pinned to the bishop. Gareyev now crumbles under the pressure. Queen to c8. This was played in anticipation of knight to e3. Gareyev goes b6, desperately trying to maintain control of d5 by giving some flight squares for the bishop. So b6 cannot be captured. That would run into the move knight d7, attacking the queen, also the bishop. And the bishop is attacked twice. So Hikaru obviously saw that and he proceeded to just improve his position bit by bit. Rook e to d1. We have bishop to a8, b5, fixing the weakness on b6 and gaining more space. White has a beautiful position. You can see here that white's pieces are very nicely centralized. Black, on the other hand, is cramped without any good options. If he tries to trade down, for example, queen c5, this would only enter into a favorable ending for Hikaru. So here bishop takes d5 is met with knight takes d5, defending the c3 pawn. So bishop takes c3, rook a c1, bishop b4, bishop takes bishop, rook takes bishop. Material is even here, but activity is key. Rook d7, gaining the 7 rank. And on rook a to d8, rook c to d1, rook takes, with such an active rook, a superior minor piece compared to the bishop. Also, this passed b pawn, white is winning. So if instead of queen c5, what if knight h5, trying to trade some pieces? This is also favorable for Hikaru. Now the pawn drops. Bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5. If queen takes a4, bishop c6 keeps this pawn nice and safe, and white's space advantage will prove to be decisive. And on bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, queen b2, knight takes e7, picks up another pawn. So another try is to go queen to e6, defending b6. But here white goes c4, and the plan is to go rook a to c1 and pushing c5. So if black captures the pawn, white will trade queens for 2 rooks. And here white is better, as the c pawn will soon fall, because it's attacked by the knight and eventually one of the rooks. So Gareyev tried the move h5. Not many options here for black. Hikaru continued to improve, and now he strikes with bishop takes f6. So that's 2 healthy passed pawns, and this is lost for Gareyev. After bishop c5, knight takes d5, that is pawn number 3. We have rook d to e8, e3, king g7, queen c7 from Nakamura, and in this position, Timur Gareyev resign. White forces the exchange of queens, and the endgame is easily winning for Nakamura. A very smooth game from Hikaru, who now leads the field with 4 out of 6 points. That's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.